I remember that chilly November evening clearly, the kind where the air feels heavier after Halloween has passed. The decorations along Maple Drive were still hanging, drooping ghosts, faded spiderwebs, half-deflated inflatables. I was in my driveway pulling fake tombstones from the lawn, trying to beat the early sunset. Across the street, my neighbor's scarecrow was still standing in his yard, facing my house. The scarecrow had been there all October, part of the neighborhood's tradition. Everyone added something spooky to their yards, but that thing always unsettled me. It wasn't like the others. Its clothes were real, old flannel and worn jeans, not store-bought. The head was a burlap sack stitched crudely around what looked like a mannequin head, except its features were sharper than any mannequin I'd ever seen. I remember glancing up as I gathered my plastic pumpkins. The scarecrow's head seemed angled slightly downward that time, like it was watching me pack up. I told myself the wind probably shifted it, but there was no wind that evening. The air was too still, and the way the shadows stretched across the cul-de-sac made the whole street feel frozen in time. My neighbor, Mr. Dorsey, was the type who kept to himself. I barely saw him outside, except for mowing the lawn or taking out trash at odd hours. The scarecrow was his only sign of Halloween spirit, and no one really commented on it. Still, that night, something about it looked off, like its posture had changed. Its shoulders seemed less slouched, more aware. I tried to shake the thought as I moved to the porch lights, unscrewing the orange bulbs I'd put in for the holiday. Every few seconds, though, I found myself glancing back across the street. It was probably just the angle or maybe my eyes adjusting to the dim light, but I could have sworn its arm was slightly raised now. I stood there for a full minute staring, waiting for movement that never came. My phone buzzed in my pocket, my friend Tyler reminding me about the game we were supposed to watch. I typed back quickly, trying not to look at that thing again, but when I did, my stomach tightened. The scarecrow's head wasn't angled toward me anymore. It was facing my front door. I walked to the edge of my driveway, pretending to check the mailbox, just to prove to myself that I was imagining things. But from that closer distance, I noticed something else. The sack around the scarecrow's head wasn't stuffed evenly. It had dents where eyes would be, and for a second I saw a faint glint, like reflection. My pulse quickened, but I laughed it off, forcing a shaky exhale. Maybe Mr. Dorsey put glass marbles under there to make it more realistic. I tried to focus on finishing up, tossing the last of the fake cobwebs into a garbage bag. When I looked up again, the scarecrow seemed perfectly still, except the faintest shimmer where its left eye should have been. I blinked hard. That's when I realized it wasn't light reflecting. It was blinking. I froze, staring across the street, the garbage bag dangling from my hand. My first instinct was to look around for someone else, maybe a trick of the light, a car's reflection, anything. But there were no cars, no people, just the sound of my own breathing. The scarecrow's face was still pointed toward my porch, one faint flicker where an eye should have been. I stepped back toward my garage, pretending to stay calm. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe Mr. Dorsey installed some kind of motion sensor inside the head, something that reacted to movement. That had to be it. Still, the more I tried to convince myself, the more wrong it felt. There was no glow, no wiring, just a dull, human-like blink in the middle of the burlap. I told myself I'd walk over there just to check, but I couldn't move. Something deep in my gut told me not to cross the street. My hands were cold, my heart hammering, and it wasn't from fear of being caught snooping. It was something heavier, like I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. I grabbed my decorations, stuffed them into a bin, and hurried back inside. Inside, the warmth didn't help. I kept glancing at the front window like my body was waiting for another sign. The blinds were half open, and through the small sliver, I could still make out its outline, motionless again. I turned on the TV, hoping the noise would drown out the thought, but I couldn't focus on the screen. Every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me look back toward that window. By 9 p.m., I finally decided to pull the blinds shut, but before I did, I took one last look. That was my mistake. The scarecrow was gone. My heart jumped so fast I had to back away from the glass. I stared at the empty yard across the street, my mind refusing to believe it. There was nowhere it could have gone. The Dorseys' backyard was fenced, and no car had passed by. I stood in silence for what felt like a full minute, waiting, listening. I tried to tell myself maybe Mr. Dorsey had brought it in. Maybe it was as simple as that, but my gut didn't buy it. The street outside looked wrong now, emptier somehow, and even though I couldn't see it anymore, I still felt like something was watching the house. I finally texted Tyler, asking if he wanted to come by to watch the game instead. I didn't tell him why. I just didn't want to be alone. He said he'd swing by in 20 minutes. That gave me just enough time to pretend everything was normal. Lights on, snacks out, doors locked twice. But I kept checking the peephole every couple minutes. At 9:30, I heard a soft knock. It wasn't the doorbell, just 3 quiet taps. I assumed it was Tyler and opened the door without thinking, but no one was there. The porch was empty, the street still. Then, from the corner of my yard, just beyond the bushes, I caught a glimpse of Plaid, the same flannel shirt the scarecrow had been wearing. I stood frozen in the doorway, gripping the handle like it could somehow protect me. The air outside was colder now, heavier, and I could hear the faint rustling of dry leaves moving across the pavement. I didn't see anyone, but that flicker of red and black flannel near the bushes didn't leave my mind. I slowly closed the door, double-locked it, and stepped back, my pulse racing. My phone buzzed again, Tyler texting that he was almost there. I felt relief wash over me for a second until I noticed something strange. The message was sent 10 minutes ago, but he still hadn't arrived. I stared at the screen, waiting for the sound of his car or the next text, but nothing came. Then from outside, I heard the faint creak of footsteps on my front porch. I leaned toward the peephole carefully, my heart pounding in my throat. For a moment, I saw only darkness. Then faintly, something moved, slow, steady, like someone shifting their weight. My porch light flickered once, then dimmed. And in that half-second of failing light, I saw the burlap face. The scarecrow was standing directly in front of my door. I stumbled backward, knocking over the bowl of snacks I'd set out. My breathing turned shallow. I tried calling Tyler, but the line went straight to voicemail. I turned every light in the house on, trying to keep the shadows away. But when I looked back toward the door, the light from outside was completely gone. Not just dim, gone, as if the bulb had been unscrewed. I crept toward the window beside the door, pushing the curtain aside just an inch. Nothing. The porch was empty. I stood there for a long time, every second stretching, until I finally convinced myself to sit down and wait for Tyler. Maybe it was someone's sick joke. Maybe one of the teens down the street had moved the scarecrow to mess with me. I tried to believe that. I really did. But then came the sound again, this time from the side of the house. A dull scraping, like straw dragging against siding. I turned off the TV, my ears straining to catch it clearly. It circled slowly, from the side wall toward the back window. I didn't dare move, but my eyes followed the sound as it reached the kitchen. I could see the curtains shifting slightly, as if someone was standing just outside. I finally whispered, "Tyler," hoping somehow it was him. No answer. Just silence, until something tapped gently against the glass. Once, twice, a third time. I inched forward, too scared to breathe. When I peeked through the thin gap in the curtain, the porch light flickered back on. The scarecrow was standing inches from the window, its head tilted, burlap face pressed against the glass. I fell backward, grabbing my phone again, hands trembling too hard to dial. But before I could, headlights flashed across the window, Tyler's car pulling up. I ran to the front door, flung it open, shouting his name. He waved from the driveway, confused, asking if everything was okay. I looked past him instinctively toward Mr. Dorsey's yard. The scarecrow was back in its spot, perfectly still. The next morning, I walked across the street before work. Mr. Dorsey was outside, sipping coffee, like nothing had happened. The scarecrow stood there again, same flannel, same stitched grin. I almost asked about it, almost told him what I saw. But before I could, I noticed something new. Underneath the scarecrow's collar, just barely visible, was a small piece of black fabric, the same t-shirt Tyler had been wearing last night. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It was the week before Halloween, and our neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard. Every house on our street had pumpkins lined up on porches, fake cobwebs stretched over bushes, and skeletons dangling from trees. My mom had me help her hang orange lights along the roof while my little sister Emily ran around the yard in her princess costume for the third time that week. Everything felt normal, the way it always does before things start to go wrong. That Thursday evening, my parents went out to a neighborhood meeting, leaving me in charge of Emily. The sky had that deep orange tint before turning into night, and the wind carried a faint chill that made the decorations sway. Emily was sitting on the couch eating candy corn and watching one of those old Halloween cartoons. I remember feeling relaxed, scrolling through my phone, completely unaware that something was about to change that night. It started when Emily called out to me from the hallway. Her voice sounded hesitant, almost like she wasn't sure if she should even speak. I walked over and saw her pointing toward the basement door. "He's down there," she said quietly, her eyes wide. I frowned and asked who she meant, but she just whispered, "The boy dressed like a ghost." I laughed at first, assuming she was making up another Halloween story. I told her not to scare herself with silly stories and reminded her we didn't even have a basement, just a small storage crawl space beneath the stairs. But Emily didn't look convinced. She said she'd heard someone talking from behind the door, asking her to come play. The way she said it sent a strange chill through me, even though I tried to act unfazed. I opened the door, turned on the hallway light, and showed her there was nothing but a few boxes and cleaning supplies. After that, I made her sit next to me in the living room. She kept glancing down the hall, chewing her nails nervously. Around 8, I put her to bed, making sure her nightlight was on and her door slightly open like she liked it. When I turned off the hallway light, I noticed the basement door was cracked open again. I was positive I had closed it earlier. I sighed, thinking maybe Emily had gotten up, so I shut it tightly this time and even latched it. I went back to my room, turned on my lamp and started doing homework. About half an hour later, I heard the faintest tapping sound coming from somewhere in the house. It was steady, 3 knocks, then silence. It didn't sound like the wind or anything mechanical. It sounded human. I went to check, heart beating faster now. The tapping had stopped by the time I reached the hall. The air felt heavy, colder somehow. I waited, listening. That's when I saw something, a faint flicker of movement behind the crack of the basement door, like someone stepping back into darkness. For a moment, I froze. Then I slowly reached for the handle. When I pulled the door open, the light from the hall barely reached the back wall. Everything looked the same as before. Dusty boxes, a broom, an old Halloween wreath. But then I heard it again, a whisper, a soft, breathy voice saying, "Don't close the door." My stomach dropped. I turned on the light, but the sound was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself I was just hearing things, maybe imagining it because of Emily's story. But that night, when I went to check on her, she was awake, staring at her window. Before I could ask what was wrong, she whispered, "He said he wants to meet you next." I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the heater, even the faint rustle of leaves outside. The next morning, I tried convincing myself it was just Emily's imagination. Still, something about her words kept replaying in my head. "He said he wants to meet you next." That tone she used. It wasn't playful or teasing, it was scared. Saturday arrived, and the neighborhood was buzzing with Halloween excitement. Families were carving pumpkins, kids were running around in costumes, and someone down the block was testing out a fog machine. My mom had gone to buy more candy, and Dad was hanging a plastic skeleton by the porch. Emily was quiet though. She sat on the steps holding her candy bucket, staring at the side of our house near the basement door. When I asked her what she was looking at, she said softly, "He was waving again last night." My chest tightened a little. "Emily," I told her, "you have to stop saying that. You're scaring yourself." She didn't argue, just looked back toward the door and said, "He said it's almost Halloween. He likes when it's cold and dark." That night, the temperature dropped sharply, the kind of crisp cold that makes the air smell like wood smoke and leaves. I was in the kitchen making popcorn when I heard something faint, a dragging sound like fabric brushing against wood. It came from the direction of the basement. I turned off the stove and listened again, heart pounding. There it was, slow, deliberate movement, followed by a soft thump. I called out for my dad, but he was outside adjusting decorations. I took a few cautious steps toward the hallway. The basement door was slightly open again, even though I knew for certain I had latched it earlier. The orange light from the porch flickered through the window, casting faint shadows that moved across the floor. I reached for the doorknob, trying to keep my hand from shaking. I swung it open. Nothing moved. The air that came out felt colder than the rest of the house, almost damp. I leaned in and switched on the light, my heart hammering. The storage space looked unchanged, brooms, boxes, a stack of Halloween decorations, but the far wall looked different. There was a faint outline there, like something had been pushed up against it recently, leaving an imprint. I stepped closer, crouching to look. That's when I noticed something sticking out from the bottom corner. Thin white fabric, crumpled like part of a sheet. It reminded me of an old ghost costume. My first thought was that Emily might have shoved it there while playing. I reached for it, but before my fingers touched the fabric, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned fast, expecting to see my dad, but the hallway was empty. The house was silent again, except for the faint whir of the heater. I backed away from the door and closed it, locking it this time. My hands were shaking. When I looked out the front window, I could see Emily outside again, standing at the edge of our yard, looking toward the neighbor's house. I went out and asked her what she was doing. She pointed toward the next house and said, "He's in their yard now." I followed her gaze, and there, half hidden behind a row of cornstalk decorations, was a small figure, a boy, pale, still, wrapped in white fabric. At first I thought it was just another decoration, but then it moved. Its head turned slowly in our direction. I froze, staring across the yard. The boy's head tilted slightly, the fabric over his face rippling in the wind. He wasn't tall, about Emily's height, but something about the way he stood made my stomach twist. No kid stood that still for that long. When I blinked, he was gone. I looked at Emily, but she wasn't surprised. She just said quietly, "He only shows himself to us." That night, my parents went to a Halloween party down the street, leaving us home again. The house looked festive with all the decorations, but the fun atmosphere felt hollow now. Emily refused to go near the hallway. I tried to distract her with a movie, but halfway through, the TV flickered and shut off by itself. The lights dimmed for a second too, as if the house sighed. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, from somewhere below, we heard soft scratching, slow, uneven, like something moving just beneath the floorboards. Emily looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "He's coming up." My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed her hand and pulled her close, trying to sound calm even though every instinct told me to run. I checked the basement door again. It was shut but rattling slightly, like someone was brushing against it from the other side. "There's no one there," I whispered, more to convince myself than her. I pressed my ear against the door, and that's when I heard breathing. Slow, shallow breathing, right on the other side. I backed away instantly. The sound stopped. Suddenly, Emily gasped. I turned and saw her pointing toward the living room window. Outside, under the faint glow of our porch lights, that same boy stood at the edge of the yard again. The sheet he wore fluttered lightly in the breeze, but I could see pale fingers gripping the edge of the fabric, holding it in place. His head tilted slowly to the side, as if studying us. I grabbed the phone to call my dad, but the line buzzed with static. The porch lights flickered again, and in that brief flash of darkness I thought I saw him closer, now standing just by the porch steps. My throat tightened. Emily started crying softly, whispering, "He found the way in." I didn't ask what she meant because deep down I already knew. A few seconds later, there was a thump from the basement. Then another, louder. It sounded like something pushing against the floor from underneath. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the door. The latch clicked by itself, releasing. Slowly, the door creaked open an inch. A cold draft poured out, smelling faintly of dust and damp soil. I stood frozen, light shaking in my hand. Then I saw movement. A small, white figure began to rise from the dark opening, pulling itself up step by step. The fabric dragged behind it, catching the light, revealing glimpses of a pale face beneath. I slammed the door shut with all my weight, locking it again and dragging a chair against the handle. The knocking continued for nearly a full minute before stopping. The next morning, the chair was still in place, but the basement door was wide open. The latch was broken. My dad said it must have come loose, but Emily refused to go near that part of the house again. Later, when I walked past the window, I noticed something in the neighbor's yard, an extra decoration, a small white figure standing among their tombstones. Only this one had its head turned toward our house. It was a chilly Friday night during Halloween week, and our street was glowing with orange lights and inflatable ghosts swaying in the wind. I'd just finished putting fake cobwebs on our porch when my best friend Ryan texted that he'd stop by. We were planning to watch horror movies, eat leftover candy, and maybe carve one last pumpkin before Halloween night. Everything about that evening felt perfectly normal at first. Inside, the house was warm and quiet except for the occasional rattle of decorations outside. My parents were out at a Halloween fundraiser, so it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator echoing through the kitchen. I dimmed the living room lights, grabbed a blanket, and set up my laptop on the coffee table. I remember thinking it felt like one of those calm nights you don't forget, peaceful in a simple way. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. The message just said, "I'm here." I looked out the front window expecting to see his car in the driveway, but the street was empty. Only the flickering pumpkins and the shadows of swaying trees filled the night. I texted him back, "Where? I don't see you." He didn't reply right away. I figured maybe he was parking down the street or trying to prank me. He loved pulling harmless scares around Halloween. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps upstairs. They were slow, deliberate, spaced out, like someone trying not to be heard. My first thought was that maybe one of my parents had come home early, but then I remembered the garage door hadn't opened. The footsteps continued, crossing from one side of the hallway to the other. I called out, "Ryan?" half laughing, half uneasy. No answer. I grabbed my phone again and texted, "Are you upstairs or outside?" His response came almost instantly this time, "Outside." "By your window?" My stomach dropped. I turned toward the big front window in the living room. The curtains were half drawn, and through the small opening, I could see part of the front yard glowing faintly under the streetlight. There was no one there. I texted back, "Which window?" But before I could hit send, something upstairs creaked again, this time louder, closer. I turned off the TV and stood completely still. The house suddenly felt different, like the air had weight. I could hear faint movement again, slow shifting, like shoes brushing against the carpet upstairs. Every light downstairs seemed too dim, every sound too sharp. My phone buzzed again and I flinched. It was another message from Ryan. "Come outside." I'll wave. I hesitated, then grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and slowly stepped toward the front door. Before I opened it, I glanced back at the staircase. The hallway above was completely dark, but I could swear I saw something. A shadow or maybe the faint outline of someone standing still at the top of the stairs. I blinked, and it was gone. I stood frozen by the door, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. Ryan's message glowed on the screen. "Come outside. I'll wave." My heart was pounding, but curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold air hit instantly, sharp and dry. The neighborhood looked calm. Pumpkins flickered on porches, plastic skeletons swayed gently in the wind. But no Ryan. I called his name softly, half expecting him to jump out from behind a bush. Nothing. My yard stretched quiet under the faint orange glow from the streetlight. I walked down the steps and looked around, scanning every corner. That's when my phone buzzed again. "I see you," the message read. My breath caught. The message came from Ryan, but his contact photo didn't look the same anymore. It was just a blank gray circle. I quickly typed, "Where are you?" and turned in a slow circle, flashlight beam sweeping across the lawn. A shape moved by my side window, just a flicker of white fabric, gone before I could focus. I ran over, shone the light through the glass, but the reflection of my own face was all I saw. Still, the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I went back inside and locked the door. The warmth of the house felt suffocating now. I checked the staircase again, nothing but shadows stretching along the walls. I texted Ryan, "Are you messing with me?" No reply this time, just silence. I sat on the couch, trying to tell myself it was some glitch or weird joke. Then from the top of the stairs came a soft creak, followed by a low whisper. I jumped up, shining my flashlight toward the hallway. The light cut through the dark, landing on a bedroom door slightly open. The whispering stopped instantly. My pulse was hammering. I took slow steps toward the stairs, each one feeling heavier than the last. My phone buzzed again before I could move closer. The message said, "I'm in your room." "Don't come up." I froze halfway up the stairs. That was Ryan's number, but it couldn't be him. He was supposed to be outside. I tried calling him, but the call didn't even ring. It just ended instantly. The house was completely silent again, except for the faint rustle of my Halloween decorations moving outside. Then from upstairs, I heard what sounded like the faint click of a door closing. I forced myself to keep moving until I reached the top step. The hallway was dim, lit only by the light from my room spilling through the doorway. I whispered, "Ryan?" hoping I'd hear his laugh. Instead, there was a slow shuffle, footsteps moving away, deeper into the house. I followed the sound toward my parents' room, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. When I pushed it open, the air inside felt cold, like a window had been left open. The curtains fluttered gently, brushing against the sill. My flashlight beam caught something, an open phone on the dresser, screen glowing. My heart sank when I saw it. It was Ryan's phone, a message still open on the screen. "I'm outside your window." For a moment I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Ryan's phone was sitting there, unlocked, the message app still open. But if his phone was here, then who had been texting me? I picked it up with trembling hands. The last few messages on the screen were the same ones I'd received. Every single one had been sent from this phone. I stumbled back, glancing toward the hallway. The house was silent again, except for the faint hum of the heater. My flashlight flickered once before steadying. I knew Ryan couldn't be upstairs. He never had a key, and yet, as I listened, I heard movement again, slow and uneven, coming from my room down the hall. My chest tightened. I called his name softly, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I took a shaky breath and crept down the hall, each floorboard creaking under my feet. My bedroom door was open wider now. I could see part of my desk, the corner of my bed, but the shadows seemed deeper, heavier somehow. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I nearly dropped the flashlight. The text said, "Don't look behind you." I froze completely, the air thick with tension. My hand tightened around the flashlight, but I couldn't bring myself to turn. My heartbeat felt like it echoed through the walls. Slowly, I forced myself to move, turning my head inch by inch. The hallway behind me was empty, but when I looked forward again, my bedroom door was fully open, swinging gently as if someone had just walked through. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief second of dim light, I saw it, someone standing in the corner of my room. Tall, still, head slightly tilted. I couldn't make out the face, but I could see one hand holding something small that glowed faintly blue. My phone. I stumbled backward, my voice cracking as I shouted, "Who are you?" The figure didn't move. Then, the phone buzzed in my hand again. A new message appeared on the screen. "Told you I was inside." My blood ran cold. I pointed the flashlight straight at the figure, but the corner was empty now. The sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs, fast, unsteady, moving toward the front door. I ran after them, heart racing, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. When I reached the living room, the door was wide open, cold air pouring in. I ran onto the porch, scanning the yard. The street was empty, just flickering decorations and the faint rustle of leaves. Ryan's car wasn't there, but something was. Footprints on the porch steps. Small, faint prints leading away into the dark. My phone buzzed again in my hand. The message read, "Thanks for letting me in." That was the last text I received before the number went inactive. The police later said Ryan had never left his house that night. His mom confirmed he'd been home watching a movie with his family. When I showed them the messages, they couldn't trace where they'd come from. The phone that sent them, the one I'd found upstairs, was gone. A week later, on Halloween night, I woke up to a vibration on my nightstand. One unread text from an unknown number. It said, "I'm outside your window again." I looked toward the curtains, and in the faint orange glow from the streetlight, I saw the shadow of a figure standing perfectly still.